What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? That question rattled in Frank Delaney's mind as he sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at a letter he didn't want to open. The edges of the envelope were worn from how many times he'd picked it up, turned it over, and set it back down again. Outside the small farmhouse window, August sun melted across the dry Ohio fields, the wind barely strong enough to sway the corn stalks. It was the kind of silence that had weight, like the house itself was grieving. Frank's dog, Lucy, lay sleeping in the corner, snoring gently. The letter was from the DMV. He already knew what it said, just like he knew why it stung. He'd failed the eye test. The memory test. The reaction time test. The license was gone. At 68, the world had finally found a quiet way to say, "We don't trust you anymore." He slid the envelope under a pile of unpaid bills and old coupons. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the ceiling fan, the slow tick of the wall clock, those were the sounds of his life now. Steady. Predictable. Fading. He reached for the remote and clicked on the old television, the one his daughter kept telling him to replace. Static gave way to a local news channel. Then came the headline in bold white letters, "Elon Musk Unveils Neuralink's Mind-Blowing Brain-Computer Interface Breakthrough." The news anchor, a young guy in a tight suit with two white teeth, was practically vibrating with excitement. Musk revealed that Neuralink's latest innovation could allow paralyzed individuals to control devices with their minds and even restore damaged neurological functions. Some say it's the dawn of human enhancement. Others call it science fiction becoming reality. Frank blinked. Then the screen cut to a video clip. Elon Musk, calm as ever, stood at a podium, surrounded by engineers and diagrams of the human brain lit up like Christmas lights. He said something that made Frank's spine straighten, something that cracked open the gray crust that had settled over his ambition. "We're just scratching the surface of what the human mind can do. Age is not the limit. Belief is." Frank froze. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, like the laws of nature didn't apply to him. Like giving up was the only real sin. And for some reason, right there in his sagging kitchen chair, with the unpaid electric bill whispering failure from across the table, Frank believed him. He looked down at his hands, rough, calloused, scarred from decades of electrical work. There was a time those hands wired whole buildings, repaired engines, even helped his daughter build a science fair volcano. That was before his wife died. Before the world got so fast and digital and disconnected. Before the visits stopped and the silences got longer. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The TV blared. Frank muted it. But he couldn't unhear Musk's voice. Age is not the limit. Belief is. The words echoed louder than anything else in the room. He got up, ignoring the crack in his knees, and walked to the garage. Dust greeted him like an old friend. The place smelled like motor oil and memories. In the back, under a tarp, sat a project he hadn't touched in years, a robotics kit he once bought to build something cool with his grandson, back when his grandson still called him Grandpa the Genius. Frank had dreamed of showing him the basics of automation, maybe even building a little mechanical dog. But time moved on. So did his daughter, and with her, the boy. The robot never got built. It just sat there, untouched, like everything else he used to care about. He pulled back the tarp. The kit was still there. The wires. The parts. The manual with his old notes in the margins. His fingers traced the cover. "We're just scratching the surface," he whispered. A laugh escaped him, sudden and surprised. It had been so long since he'd felt something other than dull disappointment. That night, instead of falling asleep to reruns, Frank sat at the old desktop computer in his study and started looking up Neuralink. He expected jargon. He expected to feel stupid. Instead, he found clarity. Forums. Explainers. Videos of people using only their minds to move cursors across screens. "We're mapping thoughts," one Neuralink engineer said in a TED Talk. "We're creating a new language between humans and machines." Frank's eyes scanned the text like a man newly literate. The spark caught. He joined a Reddit thread about do-it-yourself brain-computer interface projects. He didn't even know Reddit had people over 30 on it, but there they were, middle-aged hobbyists, tinkerers, tech freaks from all walks of life. He read a post from a guy in New Jersey building a basic neural input headband using nothing but Arduino boards and household junk. Frank typed a question into the comments. Can a 68-year-old electrician learn this stuff? He didn't expect a reply. He especially didn't expect to get one 10 minutes later. Yes. Start small. Look up the OpenBCI forum. And never think age means you're out of the game. Frank stared at the words. He reread them 5 times. Something shifted in his chest. Not a full thunderclap, just a flicker of warmth. Like the first spark before a fire. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel like a has-been or a leftover. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was standing at the edge of something big. The next morning, he ordered a few cheap components online. A neural interface sensor, a few wires, a new soldering pen. His hands trembled not with weakness but with anticipation. When the mail arrived, he barely noticed the rest of the bills. He was too busy thinking about circuits, signal flow, code. Lucy barked, confused by her owner's sudden energy. Frank laughed and said, "We're building again, girl." He emailed his daughter that night. Told her he was working on a project, something he hadn't done in a while. She replied with a single sentence, "That's great, Dad. Just don't hurt yourself." But Frank didn't care. He'd heard Elon's voice again that afternoon, in another clip someone had posted. If something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it. Frank replayed that line over and over. Because something was important. Not Neuralink, not fame, not being the next Musk. But building again. Thinking again. Proving to himself that his mind hadn't expired just because the DMV said his eyes were slow. On the third night, he stayed up until 2 a.m., poring over schematics with a magnifying glass and listening to an old Joe Rogan interview where Elon explained brain plasticity. Frank didn't understand every word, but he caught the meaning. The brain wasn't fixed. It could adapt. Change. Even late in life. The moment it all changed wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks or lightning bolts. It was just a man, a table, a dusty box of forgotten dreams, and a voice from across the screen saying, "You're not done yet." And Frank believed it. He believed it like he hadn't believed anything in years. Before the silence took over, before the walls started closing in with the quiet weight of years, Frank Delaney had been a man of motion. Not fast, not flashy, but always moving, always fixing, always reaching for something just beyond the immediate. Back then, his hands weren't just tools, they were expressions of his imagination. He could wire an entire house blindfolded, repair a failing circuit with a twist of his wrist, and make a broken thing hum again. There was pride in that. Not the kind you show off, but the kind that settles in your bones and makes you stand a little taller when no one's looking. The kind that said, "I matter because I can do things." But those days felt like they belonged to another lifetime. His house still held the echoes of that former life, the stained workbench in the garage, the shelves lined with dusty electrical manuals, the mismatched drawer of screws and bolts that only he could navigate. And there was the photo on the mantel, worn at the corners, of him and his wife, Janice, taken the day he finished building their sunroom. Her hair catching sunlight, her hand on his shoulder, his eyes squinting but smiling. That photo was 22 years old, and she'd been gone for 5. Cancer had taken her in months, and with her went the rhythm of his days. At first, he'd busied himself with the routines, cooking meals he barely tasted, keeping the lawn trimmed like she used to like, calling their daughter, Emily, once a week whether she answered or not. But slowly, the momentum faded. The house grew quieter. The calls became more strained. And the man who once fixed things stopped fixing even himself. He'd tell himself it was just age. That it was natural to slow down, to fade into the background. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was he didn't know where he fit anymore. After Janice, after retirement, after Emily moved to San Jose with her tech job and her vegan fiancé, Frank felt like a photograph left in the sun, still there, but bleached out, details lost. The loneliness didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces. The forgotten birthday call. The doctor's appointment he had to drive himself to because there was no one else. The way the young cashier at the hardware store spoke louder than necessary, assuming he couldn't hear. Then came the moment that hit hardest, a letter from the local community college. Years ago, he had volunteered to lead a basic wiring class, sharing stories and tricks with teenagers who barely knew how to hold a screwdriver. He loved it. It made him feel alive. But the letter now said the course had been discontinued due to shifting interests and enrollment. Translation: nobody cared anymore. Nobody wanted to learn from the old guy. There was another memory that clung to him tighter than the rest, one that stung like a splinter under the skin. It was the day he tried to teach his grandson, Tommy, how to solder. The boy had visited from California, 10 years old, eyes always glued to a tablet, fingers flying across screens. Frank had pulled out the robotics kit he'd bought years ago, thinking it would be a fun project. "We'll build a rover," he'd said. "Maybe one that follows lines on the floor. Your dad was always into that kind of stuff when he was your age." But Tommy had looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Can't we just download one?" the boy had asked. "They have robot apps." Frank had smiled, tried to play it off, but something in him shrank. The kit went back on the shelf. Tommy went back to his screen. That visit was the last time they really spent time together. After that, it was just birthdays and holidays over Zoom. Emily would say, "He's busy with school," but Frank knew. He'd already become one of those background figures, nice, harmless, unnecessary. And maybe that was just the natural order of things. Maybe this was what aging really was, not the pain in your knees or the pills you take before breakfast, but the way the world stops seeing you. Stops needing you. That realization had crept in slowly, like rust on metal. And Frank, the fixer, the builder, the man who once believed he could repair anything, didn't know how to fix being forgotten. It wasn't just people. It was his own body. Last winter, he'd slipped on the front steps and laid there for 20 minutes, staring at the sky, his hip aching, the cold biting through his jeans. He didn't call anyone. He didn't want the embarrassment. He got up, limped inside, and poured himself a drink. It was easier than admitting he was scared. Easier than calling Emily and hearing the panic in her voice. "You should think about moving somewhere safer, Dad," she'd said once. "A place with support. You know, just in case." In case. That phrase echoed. In case you fall again. In case you lose your memory. In case you die alone. Frank didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to be told his life was a risk to be managed. He wasn't ready to be filed away in a facility like a forgotten set of blueprints. Still, the days had started to blur. Wake up. Feed Lucy. Take pills. Watch the weather. Microwave something. Check the mail. Go to bed. The rhythm was quiet, undisturbed, and crushing. The highlight of his week was when the local grocery clerk asked him how he was doing. He always said, "Can't complain," even when everything inside him wanted to scream. And then one day, the DMV letter arrived. The final insult. The state had decided his driving days were over. He'd failed the reaction test by a fraction of a second. "We regret to inform you," it had said, "that your license is no longer valid effective August 1st. That was the day before yesterday. He hadn't opened it right away. He already knew. Knew it would feel like one more door closing. One more piece of his freedom stripped away. And maybe he wouldn't have opened it at all if it hadn't been for Elon Musk's voice on the TV. We're just scratching the surface of what the human mind can do. Age is not the limit. Belief is. It wasn't just the words. It was the certainty. The defiance. The way Musk talked like he didn't care what anyone thought. Frank had never been a fanboy or followed tech like a religion, but something about that moment hit differently. It wasn't a promise of immortality or superpowers. It was a dare. A challenge. A reminder that there was still more in him. That he wasn't used up. That maybe the fire hadn't gone out, maybe it had just been buried. That night, Frank stayed up until 3 in the morning reading about Neuralink, learning things he didn't even know how to pronounce. Not all of it made sense, but it made him feel something. Curious. Awake. Hungry. He remembered what that felt like. The last time he felt that way was when he built his first circuit board in his father's garage. He was 14, using old radio parts and scraps from a junk pile. When it worked, when the tiny light blinked on for the first time, it was like touching God. That was the memory he held on to now. Not the fall. Not the forgotten birthdays. Not the silence. The memory of the blink. The spark. The moment he knew he could create something from nothing. That moment, long before Janice. Long before Emily. Long before arthritis and memory tests and pitying looks from younger people. That was the version of Frank he wanted to find again. Not the man waiting to be managed. The man who built blinking lights from junk. And maybe, just maybe, the path to that man started with a robotics kit in the garage and a voice on a screen saying, "Keep pushing." Maybe that was the real beginning. Not of a comeback. Not of a miracle. But of a fight to matter. Again. The next morning, Frank sat in his recliner, still wearing yesterday's clothes, the coffee in his hand gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been racing with things it hadn't dared touch in years, schematics, possibilities, purpose. But now the morning sun cut across the floor like judgment, and the doubt had crept back in, silent and sharp. Who was he kidding? He hadn't written a line of code in decades. He barely remembered how to use half the features on his phone. What business did he have tinkering with robotics or interfaces or neural signals? What was he even trying to prove? That he still mattered. To who? The house was quiet again, except for Lucy's occasional rustling as she circled her bed and lay back down. Outside, the mail truck sputtered down the street, indifferent as ever. Frank didn't get up. He just stared at the blue-lit screen of his old computer monitor, still open to a tab with the Neuralink live stream. A replay of Elon Musk's presentation played again on loop. The biggest barrier to progress is not technology. It's mindset, Musk said, calm, unsmiling, certain. We are conditioned to limit ourselves by what we think is possible. Frank scratched his chin, feeling the familiar stubble, the sag of his skin. Easy for you to say, he muttered to the screen. You've got labs. Teams. Money. People who believe in you. He didn't say it bitterly. He said it like a man stating a fact. That's what it felt like, being 68 in a world that ran on software and speed. Like the game had changed, and nobody left you the playbook. Later that day, Emily called. Her voice was chipper, rushed, half distracted. Hey, Dad, just checking in. You doing okay? He hesitated before answering. Yeah. I've been working on a little project. Something in the garage. There was a pause. The garage, she repeated. Like with tools. Dad, you're not climbing on ladders again, are you? No, no, he said, waving his hand though she couldn't see it. It's something smaller. A robotics kit. One I bought for Tommy a while back. Thought I'd dust it off. Get my brain moving again. He waited for the silence to pass. A robotics kit, she said finally. That's interesting. Just something to keep me busy. Well, okay, she said, her tone guarded, careful. Just be careful, Dad. You know what the doctor said about your blood pressure and overdoing it. That tone. He hated that tone. The one she used when she was being supportive but didn't really believe in him. The one that made him feel like a walking liability. I'm not overdoing it, he said a little too sharply. I'm just trying to use my brain before it gives up on me. Another pause. Okay. I'm glad you're staying active. That's good. Just, don't get too frustrated. These things can be tricky. He ended the call not long after that, with a tight smile and a fake, love you. The words didn't come out bitterly, but they felt thin. He knew she cared. He did. But somewhere along the way, the concern had started to sound like permission. Like he needed to be managed. Like he'd been demoted to a child status, supervised, watched, second-guessed. That evening, he tried again with the kit. Spread out the parts on the dining table. Fumbled with wires, browsed through YouTube tutorials, paused and rewound clips trying to follow what once would have been second nature. He didn't even get past the breadboard. Everything looked familiar but foreign, like seeing an old neighborhood that had been rebuilt into something unrecognizable. The manuals were old. The sensors were outdated. Half the pieces didn't fit quite right. He spent an hour trying to get a simple motor to spin and failed. When the circuit sparked once and nothing happened, he pushed his chair back and let out a long, bitter sigh. Maybe she's right, he mumbled to Lucy, who lifted her head briefly before going back to sleep. Maybe I'm chasing smoke. He thought about putting it all back in the box. Shoving it into the garage again. Letting it collect another 10 years of dust. But instead, he sat down and opened a tech forum he'd found the other night, one of the Neuralink DIY communities. He typed out a post, former electrician, 68, trying to get back into robotics. Everything feels like it's changed. Anyone else out there starting over late in life? He hit submit. Then he sat back and stared at the ceiling. 10 minutes later, there was a reply. You're never too late to learn. Respect for diving in. Start with OpenBCI basics. And don't be afraid to fail. Frank blinked. Another reply came 5 minutes later. You've got more experience than most of us, old man. Don't quit. He sat up a little straighter. There it was again. That flicker. That spark. People talking to him like he was a peer. Like he belonged. The next few days were a blur of slow but deliberate progress. He watched tutorials during breakfast. He printed out diagrams. He practiced soldering on scrap boards, his hands trembling slightly but improving with each attempt. He ordered a basic neural signal reader online, a headband model used in meditation apps, and tried to figure out how it interfaced with a microcontroller. And still, the doubt lingered. Every mistake felt heavier than it used to. Every technical term he didn't recognize made him feel like an imposter. His daughter called again, this time with Tommy on the line. The boy sounded older. Distant. Mom says you're building a robot, he asked, not quite mocking, but not curious either. That's the idea, Frank said. Maybe you can help me with the software side. You're good at computers, right? I mean, kinda, Tommy said. I mostly just game. Don't really do the coding stuff. Frank tried not to let the disappointment show. Well, if you ever want to learn, we could build something together. Still got that rover idea. Tommy mumbled something about homework. Emily returned to the call and said, he's got a full schedule, Dad. Maybe later, okay? That night, Frank stayed up past midnight, staring at a blank code window, trying to remember how to write a basic function. He felt like a dinosaur trying to program a spaceship. But he didn't close the window. Didn't turn off the computer. He left it open like a promise. The next day, he watched an old podcast interview with Elon Musk. Joe Rogan asked him if he ever felt like giving up. Musk paused, then said, "If something's important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it." Frank replayed that line 3 times. That's what it was about. Not finishing the robot. Not impressing his daughter. Not going viral. It was about doing something that mattered to him. Even if no one else saw it. Even if it failed. Even if the only person who knew it happened was him. Because the alternative was the recliner. The silence. The slow fade. And Frank wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Not when there was still fire in his mind, even if his body moved slower. That weekend, his neighbor, Bill, dropped by. Retired HVAC guy, 2 years younger, proud of not owning a computer. He peeked into the living room, saw the mess of wires and diagrams and blinking LEDs. "What in God's name are you building in here, Frank?" Frank chuckled. "Trying to keep the lights on upstairs before they go out completely." Bill laughed like it was a joke. "You're nuts. Should be out fishing with me. Not playing mad scientist." Frank just smiled and nodded. Let him laugh. Let them all laugh. Because something had started to shift. Not fast. Not loud. But real. The question that haunted him wasn't, "What if I fail?" anymore. It was, "What if I stop trying?" He'd lived through loss. Through silence. Through being forgotten. But now, with every wire he stripped, every video he watched, every late-night solder that sparked like magic, he felt something returning. Not youth. Not time. But purpose. That was the war inside him now. The war between the part that wanted to give in and the part that dared to keep going. The war between the fading echo and the voice, Elon's voice, his own voice, saying, "Push forward." Frank had made his decision. The inner war wasn't over. But for the first time in years, he was fighting back. It started with a single wire. Thin, red, barely longer than his pinky finger. Frank held it in his hand like it was a lifeline, like it had weight beyond its plastic casing and copper core. He stripped the end with care, slid it into the breadboard beside the neural sensor module, and soldered it into place. Just one wire. But it felt like the first brick in a bridge back to something he'd lost long ago. For the past 3 weeks, he'd been working in silence most days, Lucy curled up nearby, the house humming with the quiet noise of focus. The initial fear that this was all some pipe dream, just an old man playing tech wizard, hadn't disappeared entirely, but it no longer dictated every move. Something had shifted. The moment he connected that sensor to the Arduino and saw the signal light flicker for the first time, he felt a surge of emotion so strong he had to sit down. It wasn't even a working brain-computer interface yet. All it did was register a basic pulse, a crude, noisy signal spike when he blinked. But it was real. It was happening. The human body sending a thought, however primitive, into a machine. Not decades away. Not theoretical. Right there, in his dining room, with coffee-stained notes and scratched-up tools and a dog snoring beside his feet. He reached for the notebook he'd started keeping again and scribbled 3 words, "Blink detected." Holy hell. He stared at it, the pen trembling in his fingers. For years, he'd only written down grocery lists and phone numbers. Now, he was documenting brain activity. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was more alive than he'd felt in years. But the change wasn't just technical. Something in Frank himself had begun to rewire. He started getting up earlier. He shaved every morning, even if no one was coming over. He began walking Lucy farther than usual, even if his knees barked in protest. And during those walks, his mind ran wild. What if he could build something more than a blinking cursor? What if he could get the headband to trigger simple robotic movement? Could a thought lift a finger on a machine? Could he rig it to open a garage door? Turn on a light? His brain started to buzz with purpose, with questions he hadn't asked in decades. It wasn't about Neuralink directly, he knew he'd never install anything into his brain, and he didn't need to. What Elon had done was plant the idea that the rules weren't fixed. That you didn't need permission to change. That the world would try to retire your spirit long before your body, but only if you let it. One morning, after finally getting the signal to reliably detect eye movement, he posted a short video to a tiny YouTube channel he'd created under the name Bold Brain Builder. Just a 40-second clip showing the blinking cursor move when he focused and blinked on command. Signal received, he said at the end, smiling into the camera. Frank Delaney, age 68, Ohio. Still learning. He didn't expect anyone to see it. But within 2 days, the video had 3,000 views. Not viral, not by modern standards, but to Frank, it felt like a stadium. Comments poured in. "This is amazing," wrote one. "Gives me hope for my dad." Another said, "Dude, I'm 22 and still too scared to start. Respect." Someone else just wrote, "Subscribed. Teach me, Sensei." He read those words 10 times. Sensei. Him. The old man with shaking hands and a garage full of rust. He hadn't realized how starved he was to be seen until someone saw him. And not as fragile. Not as past tense. But as a pioneer. That night, he called Emily. "Hey, kiddo," he said, trying to keep the excitement from sounding like desperation. "You ever check out YouTube?" She laughed. "Of course, Dad. Why?" "I started a channel. Just one video so far. Nothing fancy. But I'm showing how I'm building this interface. Got a couple thousand views." Silence. Then, "Wait, really?" "Yeah," he said, voice soft but proud. "It's called Old Brain Builder. Figured I might as well teach what I'm learning." "Wow. That's awesome, Dad." And this time, she meant it. He could hear it in her voice. Not worry. Not skepticism. Just real, unfiltered admiration. "Tommy would love that," she added. "He's been into robotics lately. You two should talk." Frank's breath caught slightly. "Yeah. I thought he was more into gaming." "He was," she said. "But now he's asking about Arduino and Raspberry Pi. You might have rubbed off on him after all." For a moment, Frank didn't say anything. He just let the warmth settle in his chest. A tiny connection, built across years and silence and missed chances. It wasn't a fix. But it was a wire. A line from then to now. Later that week, he started planning a basic project with Tommy, just a virtual button press using brainwave focus. Nothing fancy. But the kid was interested. Asked questions. Sent links. Even laughed at Frank's clumsy attempts at editing. "You need better music, Grandpa," he'd said. No offense. Frank laughed harder than he had in months. "None taken. You find it, I'll use it." He started calling his project the Thought Switch. The idea was simple. Using a basic EEG reader to detect focus and trigger an LED light. But the symbolism of it was powerful. Thought creates action. Intention creates change. Just one thing he changed. One wire. One choice not to lie down and disappear. One small rebellion against the assumption that his best days were behind him. And everything else had followed. Frank started making weekly videos, nothing fancy, just honest updates, small demos, and thoughts about learning late in life. He talked about failure openly. Talked about confusion, slow progress, the frustration of shaking hands and fading memory. But also the joy. The curiosity. The fire that came from trying. Comments kept rolling in. Other seniors. Veterans. Teachers. Teenagers. My grandpa saw this and started digging out his old radio equipment. I thought I was too late to start. You changed my mind. Subscribed. I hope I'm like you at 68. And one that made him sit back in his chair and blink hard. I haven't seen my dad this alive in years. Thank you. He wasn't famous. He didn't need to be. He was making ripples. He was proving, quietly but powerfully, that age didn't disqualify you from innovation, from relevance, from becoming. One morning, an email came from a small science podcast asking for an interview. The subject line read, "We'd love to talk about your thought switch project." Frank stared at the screen, mouth slightly open. He read the message twice. Then a third time. It was happening. Not a fantasy. Not a daydream. But real. Concrete. Measurable. All because he'd changed one thing. Not the world. Just the story he told himself about who he was allowed to be. That day, he didn't think about the DMV letter. He didn't think about the missed birthdays or the forgotten names or the fading strength in his knees. He thought about the wire. The spark. The way his grandson now texted him almost daily. The blinking LED light responding to the mind of a man everyone thought was past his prime. And he smiled. Because this was just the beginning. The day of the podcast interview, Frank woke up earlier than usual. The house was still dark, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and Lucy's gentle breathing at the foot of the bed. He lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, letting the strange mix of nerves and disbelief settle in his chest. At 68, he'd figured all his firsts were behind him. First love. First house. First job. First funeral. But today was a first too. His voice was going out into the world, not as a warning, not as a cautionary tale, but as a story worth hearing. He brewed a fresh pot of coffee, shaved, and put on his cleanest collared shirt. Nothing fancy, but it felt right. He even spritzed the old cologne Janice used to like, something about the scent grounded him. In the mirror, he looked like someone preparing for something important. Not a man winding down, but one winding up. The podcast was small, a weekly show about tech, aging, and innovation hosted by a guy named Sam who called himself a futurist for the forgotten. Frank liked that. He liked the sound of someone remembering the ones time tried to erase. The call was over Zoom. Frank's webcam wasn't great, but it worked. When Sam appeared on the screen, he had headphones on, a warm smile, and an easygoing voice that made the tension in Frank's shoulders soften just a little. "Frank Delaney," Sam said, "your videos have been getting some serious attention. I've had 3 different people send me your thought switch project in the last week. I knew I had to talk to you." Frank chuckled, a little embarrassed. "I didn't expect anyone to care, honestly. I was just trying to prove to myself I still had a little juice left in the tank." "Well," Sam said, leaning in, "you're proving a lot more than that. Mind if I ask, you're nearly 70, right? What made you start this now?" Frank paused. The truth wasn't technical. It wasn't even about Neuralink. It was about that slow, aching fear that he was disappearing. "I think I just got tired of waiting," he said finally. "Tired of feeling like the story was over. You wake up one day and realize the world stopped expecting anything from you. They want you safe, quiet, slow. But I kept hearing this voice in my head, Elon Musk, believe it or not, saying, you're only limited by what you believe is possible." I figured maybe he was right. Maybe I was the one putting up the roadblocks. Sam nodded. That's powerful. So what did you do? Started small, Frank said. Pulled out an old robotics kit. Ordered a cheap EEG reader online. Wired it up to a breadboard. Failed 100 times. But then, he smiled, remembering. Then it worked. The signal came through. Just a blink. Just a light. But it was a signal from my brain to the machine. And something inside me turned back on with it. For a while, the conversation flowed easily. Talk of microcontrollers, signal interference, focus levels, and YouTube trolls who said it was all fake. Frank didn't care about the skeptics. He'd built something. It worked. That was enough. But near the end of the interview, Sam leaned in again and asked, "What would you say to someone your age who's watching this right now? Someone who's sitting on the couch thinking it's too late?" Frank felt his throat tighten. He hadn't prepared an answer for that. But something deep, raw, and real began to rise. "I'd say I know how it feels," he began. "To sit in that chair and think it's over. To feel the silence closing in. To feel your body turning against you, your memories slipping, your kids moving on with their lives while you're left behind. I've been there. I was there. And then one night, I watched a video. Just a clip, Musk saying we limit ourselves more than reality ever does. It sounded arrogant at first. But then I realized he was right. I was waiting. Waiting for someone to give me permission to still matter." He paused, heart pounding. "But the truth is, no one gives you that. You have to take it. You have to decide you're not done. Even if your hands shake. Even if your knees ache. Even if the world has moved on. You're not done until you say you are." Sam sat silently for a moment, visibly moved. Then he leaned forward, voice quiet. "That may be the most important thing we've ever aired." When the interview ended, Frank closed the laptop and just sat there. It had gone well. More than well. But what stayed with him wasn't the attention. It was how good it felt to tell the truth. Not the polished version. The real version. The scared, trembling, hopeful version. That afternoon, the video went live. And everything changed. By the next morning, the interview had 50,000 views. Then 100,000. Frank's email inbox exploded. Messages from veterans, retired teachers, widowers, even teenagers who said his story made them cry. "My mom watched your interview and signed up for a coding class," one message read. "She hasn't tried anything new in 20 years. Another said, "I'm 19 and I've been terrified of failure. But you made me realize fear doesn't go away, you just get better at pushing through it." Frank was stunned. Overwhelmed. Grateful. But the message that shook him the most came 2 days later. It was from a Neuralink engineer. The subject line read, "Would love to talk about your thought switch demo." Frank opened the email with trembling hands. The body was short and direct. "Hi Frank. I'm one of the interface engineers at Neuralink. I saw your podcast and was blown away by the clarity of your thought-controlled trigger. We're working on ways to simplify user engagement for older adults, and I think your DIY approach could offer some insight. If you're open to it, I'd love to have a quick call sometime soon." Frank leaned back in his chair, breath catching in his throat. Neuralink. The actual company. The thing that had sparked all this. Reaching out to him. He replied with a simple yes. They scheduled a Zoom call for the following Thursday. In the days leading up to it, Frank barely slept. He reread his notes, cleaned his project table, rehearsed what he might say. Not because he wanted to impress them, but because he wanted to honor the journey. Honor the scared old man who'd almost given up, and the part of him that said, "Build anyway." The call lasted 25 minutes. The engineer, Jasmine, was sharp, kind, and intensely curious. She asked how he'd wired the headband. How he filtered the noise. How he mapped the input to a digital switch. Frank answered everything, slow and steady, with a touch of disbelief still running under his voice. At the end, Jasmine said, "You may not know this, but what you're doing, democratizing this kind of tech through story, it's incredibly rare. You're speaking a language people trust. That's powerful." After the call, Frank sat in silence for nearly an hour. Not stunned. Not overwhelmed. Just, full. Full of purpose. Full of proof. Full of the quiet joy that comes when you realize you didn't just chase something, you caught it. And more than that, you became something along the way. That night, Emily called. Not just to check in. Not to manage him. But because she'd watched the podcast twice and cried both times. "Dad," she said, voice cracking, "I didn't know how lost you felt. I thought you were okay. I should have asked more. I'm sorry." Frank didn't scold. Didn't blame. He just let the silence hold them both. Then he said, "I didn't know how to say it, Em. I thought if I admitted it, it'd make it real." "It's real," she said softly. "But so is this. What you're doing. What you're becoming." "Becoming," he repeated. He liked the sound of that. Becoming. Not fading. Not ending. Not retiring. Becoming. That weekend, Tommy sent him a short video. The boy had wired a motion sensor to a small servo motor, and when he walked past it, the arm lifted. "It's not mind control," Tommy said, grinning, "but it's a start." Frank laughed. Cried a little. Rewatched it 10 times. It wasn't the robot. It was the wire between them. The connection. The possibility. And maybe that was the real breakthrough. Not just the technology. But the belief. That it's never too late to spark something new. To reconnect with people. With purpose. With yourself. Frank had begun by blinking into a machine. But what he'd really done was wake up. Fully. Fiercely. Finally. Frank never imagined his name would be associated with the word legacy. That word had always belonged to other men, businessmen, inventors, soldiers, coaches. Men with plaques or buildings named after them. Men who had clearly, unquestionably, done something. Not electricians from Ohio who spent the last 10 years talking to a dog more than a person. But now, when people emailed him, messaged him, tagged him in videos, that word kept coming up. Thank you for showing what legacy really means. You're building a new legacy for all of us who thought it was too late. It still felt strange. Not undeserved, not fake, just strange, like wearing a suit you didn't know you owned. But the truth was, things had changed. Not in one moment, but slowly, brick by brick. His YouTube channel had grown to over 100,000 subscribers, not because the videos were polished, but because they were honest. Raw. Real. He'd made over a dozen episodes now, some technical tutorials, others more reflective. He talked about neuroplasticity, brainwave frequency bands, even the basics of spike detection in DIY EEG systems. But he also talked about fear. About loneliness. About how learning something new didn't erase those feelings, but it did give them somewhere to go. People started calling him the grandfather of mind tech. He laughed the first time he heard it. Then he heard it again. And again. It became part of the identity he never knew he'd grow into. His neighbors, who once rolled their eyes when they saw wires spread across the kitchen table, started asking questions. One of them, Marlene, brought over her grandson for help with a science project. They sat around Frank's makeshift workstation for an hour, tinkering with a voice-activated light switch. When it worked, the kid gasped like he'd witnessed magic. Frank felt the same way. One afternoon, the local high school invited him to speak. Just a quick demo and a little inspiration, the email said. Frank almost declined. What would he say to a room full of teenagers who barely looked up from their phones? What did an old man with a blinking light on his forehead have to offer them? But something inside him whispered, do it anyway. So he did. He wore his navy jacket. Brought a printed diagram of the thought switch circuit. Hooked the EEG reader up live, right there on stage, and blinked the LED into life. The gymnasium burst into applause like he'd pulled off a Vegas trick. Then he spoke. Not about tech, at least not at first. But about time. About how the world moves fast and loves youth, but how the most powerful muscle they'll ever develop is their willingness to begin again, no matter their age. You'll fail, he said. I have. I've soldered the wrong wire more times than I can count. But the failure doesn't mean you're done. It means you're building something. By the time he finished, even the teachers looked misty-eyed. A few kids lined up afterward to ask questions, to shake his hand, to tell him their own ideas. One girl said she wanted to make a prosthetic hand controlled by eye movement. Another said his grandfather had stopped talking after his wife passed, but now they were watching Frank's videos together. He's building a little light switch too, the boy said. He even named it after my grandma. That night, Frank walked Lucy under the stars and felt something deep and quiet bloom in his chest. He wasn't just doing this for himself anymore. He was holding open a door. For his grandson. For his neighbor's kid. For people like him who had believed the clock only moved one way. That same week, Neuralink reached out again, not for a partnership or a job, but to invite him to a closed webinar on accessibility design. We've been inspired by your simplicity, Jasmine said. Sometimes innovation isn't about pushing forward. It's about translating what's already possible into something someone else believes they can touch. Frank smiled when he heard that. He wasn't building rockets or neural implants. He was building bridges. In one of his later videos, he titled it simply, What I Know Now at 68 That I Didn't Know at 38. It wasn't a tech demo. It was just Frank, sitting at his bench, the light behind him warm and soft, Lucy at his feet. He talked to the camera like it was an old friend. If you're watching this and you think you've missed your window, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me. There is no window. There is no gate that closes. There is only the day you decide to begin. That's it. That's the whole thing. You don't have to know how. You don't have to be fast. You don't have to be brilliant. You just have to care enough to try. And then, you try again. That video hit 1 million views in under a week. And still, Frank stayed the same. He walked Lucy. He tinkered. He made tea instead of coffee sometimes because the caffeine made his hands shake. But inside, something had fundamentally shifted. He wasn't running from age anymore. He was walking with it. Learning with it. Honoring it. One evening, Emily came over with Tommy and a small wrapped box. What's this? Frank asked, blinking in surprise. Open it, she said, smiling. Inside was a small, laser-engraved plaque. It read, in honor of Frank Delaney, who taught us that curiosity doesn't retire. Frank swallowed hard. You made this? Tommy designed it. I paid for it, she said with a laugh. We wanted you to have something. Something to remind you that what you've done here, it matters. Not just online. To us. Tommy nodded. You're kinda famous now, Grandpa. Well, sure, Frank said, voice tight with emotion. Famous for blinking at a light. But they all knew it was more than that. He had built something far greater than a device. He had rebuilt himself. And in doing so, he had become the spark for others. Days passed. The seasons turned. Frank kept building. The thought switch evolved into a more refined board. He partnered with a community college to create a free, downloadable curriculum called Begin Again Tech, focused on retirees, veterans, and anyone who thought they were too old to start over. He started getting letters in the mail, actual handwritten letters, from seniors in Montana, Texas, Maine. One woman said she'd bought her first laptop because of him. Another said she'd started journaling her dreams again. Some people sent photos of their little blinking lights. Frank kept them all in a shoebox beside the bench. Not because he needed validation, but because they reminded him of where he started. One blink. One wire. One choice. That was legacy. Not the kind that carves your name in stone. The kind that plants seeds in places you'll never visit. That helps someone find a reason to get up and try, even when the mirror tells them they're done. The legacy of presence. Of persistence. Of quietly, steadily proving that a meaningful life doesn't end, it adapts. That night, as the sky faded into deep velvet, Frank stepped onto the porch with Lucy. The stars blinked above, their own silent code written in ancient light. He thought about Elon Musk, not the billionaire, not the engineer, but the idea of Elon. The challenger. The voice that said, break the limits. Rewrite the rules. Refuse to be ordinary. Frank smiled. You know, he said aloud, maybe legacy isn't what we leave behind. Maybe it's what we light up while we're still here. And with that, he turned back inside, where his bench waited. Where the future still opened like an unfinished circuit. Still waiting to be wired. Still ready to shine. The victories had come gently, one blink at a time, but pride is fragile, and doubt has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. Frank Delaney closed his laptop after reading the latest comment on his Begin Again Tech project, a well-meaning message from someone saying he was too old for this world. He stared at the screen long after the monitor went dark. He felt the old panic tighten in his chest, the same weight he'd known during doctor visits, during silent dinners, during license revocations. He shook his head and stood. He lit a lamp at his bench, his hands unsteady, and stared at the glowing thought switch circuit. The LED pulsed regularly now, reliably. But that didn't prevent a whisper in his mind, "What are you doing?" A patched-up code snippet on a second-hand computer. A blinking light in a forgotten kitchen. Imperfect. Insignificant. The email from Neuralink's Jasmine still sat unopened. The invitation to speak at a virtual accessibility roundtable felt more hostage than honor. Could he really talk in front of engineers who clawed space for brain chips? What could he offer but sentimentality? Later that night, his daughter called again, but this time directly from her car, voice half through a commute. "Dad," she said, tone clipped, "they're seeing weird spikes in the comments. Some people are saying you're a gimmick. That you're doing this for attention, or that you're misleading folks. That you're exploiting your age." The words were gentle. Not cruel. But they landed like a hand over his heart, squeezing. "What do I say to people like that?" Frank offered. I don't know. "You don't have to," Emily replied. "Let them doubt. You know what you're doing is real." Still, he didn't feel certain. Not when the screen could be turned against you so easily. The next morning, he sat at the bench under a single bulb, assembling a prototype for the Thought Switch V2 board, the version he hoped he'd present to the students and engineers and communities who'd followed his journey. But the soldering iron trembled in his hand. The wires seemed too thin, too flimsy. He cursed under his breath and smacked a fingertip. Pain didn't help, but at least it was tangible. Real. Not abstract. He held his hand beneath his breath and thought of why he was doing this. Not for fame. Not for nostalgia. For purpose. The bench held traces of memory, notes in Janice's handwriting, schematics from his younger self, tools that still had a sheen. It held the people he lost and the son he loved and the life he'd thought ended. He pressed his palm into the table, standing up slowly. Outside, Lucy barked. Come on, he thought. Come outside. He walked her around the yard, feeling the sun on his back. The voice of Elon Musk echoed in his mind, inspirational but brutal sometimes. If something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it. But Musk hadn't walked with fear. Frank had. Fear was home for him. The next afternoon, he swallowed the letter, opened it. It was from the Access Roundtable organizers. They'd rescheduled, wanted him to speak specifically about navigating emotional barriers in innovation. He blinked. That was never part of the plan. He wanted to talk about circuits and neuroplasticity and LED feedback loops. Not fear. Not shame. He typed a reply, thank you. I'm honored. I'll talk. Then he backed away, picked up the Dell with the blinking LED, and took it to the dining table. He set it in front of him and just stared. So much of the world had moved faster than he could catch up. People said he was out of time, out of context, out of place. But this piece of glowing plastic blinked right back. It said, I exist. I mattered. That evening, he started writing his talk. Not a polished speech. Not a polished speech. A confession. I have doubts. Every day. I'm scared this might be the point in the story where I fail, and everyone forgets. But then that LED blinks, or someone says they started programming because of me, and I remember what I believed, that action beats fear. He printed it out. Highlighted lines. Practiced in the bathroom mirror. Made mistakes. Stuttered. Crumpled pages. Then he started again. The night before the roundtable, he barely slept. Dreams of tangled wires, failing circuits, blank faces. When he woke, Lucy nudged him awake gently. He rubbed his face, walked to the bench, and looked at the blinking LED. Today. That was all that mattered. He logged into the Zoom. He saw dozens of faces, engineers, developers, designers, advocates. The kind of crowd Musk addressed at big stages. But this was different. They were close. Intent. Waiting. The moderator introduced him. Frank Delaney. Hometown Ohio. Thought switch creator. Ask him anything. He clicked. The LED blinked. He took a breath. And he spoke. He spoke about fear. About age. About how loneliness numbs ambition. How one whisper can stop your hands from building. How the world expects you to fade, but you can train yourself to flame. He spoke honestly about criticism. About attention. I'm not doing this to sell dreams. I'm doing this to fight disappearance. Because disappearance is real and it's happening while we talk. But it doesn't have to win. In the chat, someone typed, thank you. Another, needed to hear that. His voice cracked. He pressed on. He talked about how he wired the V2 board differently. He showed the outline. He asked for help. Yes. Help. The richest human act, he realized. At the end, a man from an elderly care advocacy group asked, would you help us build a simple curriculum for reinvention, for older folks who feel unseen? Frank looked up, sweat on his brow. And he said, yes. After the session, Emily called. Dad, you were incredible, she said. I cried. You were everything I didn't know how to say. Frank let himself cry too. Not from triumph. But from relief. From knowing doubt doesn't mean defeat. That speaking fear out loud doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. The next morning, he returned to the bench. Cut open a new board. Soldered fresh traces. Wrote on his page, doubt returns, but so do I. Because he wasn't done. Not yet. Not as long as there was blinking light, and belief, to fight for. Frank woke slowly that morning, the spring air drifting in through the cracked kitchen window carrying birdsong and faint motor sounds from the quiet road. He sipped his coffee while scrolling through notifications. Hundreds of messages, comments, and emails from all over, retirees discovering microcontrollers, veterans relearning the meaning of purpose, college professors who used his videos in their classes, grandchildren building blinking lights with their grandparents. One email stood out. A retired teacher in Kansas said, "Watching your channel has reminded me why I became a teacher. Thank you." Frank blinked back tears. Who knew a blinking LED could reignite a vocation? He closed the laptop and glanced at the thought switch circuit glowing softly on his workbench. That light wasn't just his own spark anymore. It was electricity passed on, borrowed, reflected back with appreciation and warmth. He scratched his head, almost at the point of baldness, and thought, community. That was what it had become. Our story, not just his. He slid out of his chair with effort, his knees always reminded him he wasn't as young as he once was, but Lucy's eager bark right at his feet couldn't be ignored. They walked the yard, the grass damp with dew, and he thought about those letters tucked into a shoebox on the bench, each one a beacon of someone trying again. He shook his head, smiling. I started this to matter again. And it's grown into something bigger. Back in the garage, he opened his email and saw an invitation he barely dared hope for, a request from a community tech makerspace in Columbus. They asked if he'd host a Senior Tech Saturday, a free workshop for older adults curious about electronics, Raspberry Pi, or brain-computer interfaces. His fingers trembled as he typed back, "Yes. I'd love to." Within hours, another message arrived, from a nonprofit supporting veterans with mobility issues, asking if he'd attend a virtual event to share his story. And another, from a local library, offering their basement space for hands-on classes. Frank sat back, head spinning. This had become bigger than blinking lights. It was about connection. About carving out small spaces where older adults could belong, not as relics, not as charity, but as makers. That afternoon, he recorded a short video announcing the Senior Tech Saturdays. He held his phone with shaking hands, voice quiet but steady, "Hello, friends. If you've ever thought it was too late to start learning, I want you to know, it's not. Starting next Saturday at the Columbus Maker Hub, I'll be leading a free workshop. We'll wire, we'll code, we'll learn together. No experience needed. Age is just a number. Curiosity is timeless. I hope you can join." He uploaded it, heart pounding. Within an hour, comments flew in, "Can't wait. Is there one near me in Michigan? My wife and I will drive from Ohio City." The energy felt electric. That Saturday arrived with gray skies and drizzle. Frank drove the few miles to the Maker Hub, nerves tangled in his stomach. He walked in, toolbox in hand, and felt eyes turn when he flicked the circuit board on, and it blinked. Then, people gathered. Not students. Not kids. Men and women in their late 60s, 70s, even 80s. One woman in a flowery sweater said, "I haven't held a soldering iron since my husband passed. But I think today, I want to try." Another shied forward with shaky hands, and Frank walked over, guiding her gently, and she smiled when her first solder glowed. That afternoon was pure electricity. Laughter, conversations, sparks, literal and metaphorical. Stories about cars they used to fix, radios they built in basements, dreams they set aside for kids or illness or life. But now they were there, building again. And Frank realized, this was healing. Not self-help books or therapy, but this, shared discovery, shared tools, shared failures and triumphs. By the end of the day, they'd built simple LED circuits, small buzzers, and connections. The local paper quoted someone who'd once felt invisible saying, "I feel like I matter again." When Frank packed up, his chest felt surprisingly full, like the blinking LED had grown into something warm. He drove home in silence, memories humming. Evening came, and Emily and Tommy visited, Tommy holding a crude circuit board he wired himself. He grinned, showing his grandpa. "You showed me this," he said. Frank's heart stuttered. "You built it. You taught me how." "Thanks," the boy said. Emily just looked at him, eyes wet. "This community you created," she said softly, "it's bigger than you ever expected." Frank nodded. He realized Elon Musk's voice on TV, that moment, had been the first spark. But the real change had come from people seeing each other, and being seen. Weeks passed. Senior Tech Saturdays continued. They expanded to other towns via Zoom. A retired vet from Indiana logged in weekly. A woman in Maine mailed her little blinking circuit. They created a shared toolkit PDF that had been downloaded thousands of times. The local community college partnered with Frank to offer an informal, second act electronics elective. He recorded guest lectures from his living room. And Neuralink, well, they reached out again. This time to ask if they'd like to feature some of the community stories in a campaign about accessibility and intergenerational learning. Frank hesitated. But eventually said yes. If his community got credit and Micah, his neighbor who'd helped lead soldering sessions, could join the conversation. The email chain flew back, absolutely. He smiled. He wasn't sure if Musk or Neuralink would see him as meaningful. But he did see thousands of people rediscovering themselves. And maybe that mattered more. One evening, he sat on his porch as dusk settled, Lucy at his feet, watching fireflies blink like tiny circuits in the fields. He sipped tea, thinking, honestly, if I'd stopped waiting for a spark, it never would have happened. But starting, that's the part we all can do. He stood, brushed off his knees, and went inside to open the messages bag beside the bench. More letters, more stories. He picked one from a man in South Carolina. "I'm 72 and finally learning CAD design for 3D printing my own tools." That light, blinking, in all its imperfect glory, it had become the world saying, "You matter." And maybe the greatest thing he'd built wasn't a circuit or a toolkit. It was community. Frank sat quietly in his favorite armchair, the glow from the fireplace casting dancing shadows across the room. His hands rested on the well-worn arms, the slight tremor in his fingers more noticeable in the stillness. It had been a long day of sorting through workshop plans and community emails, but as he stared at the blinking thought switch V2 circuit resting on the coffee table, his mind wandered to what was coming next. The evening was peaceful until the chime of his email notification startled the silence. He reached over and opened his laptop, eyes scanning the new message with a mix of curiosity and tiredness. The subject line read simply, "Urgent, Neuralink collaboration opportunity." His breath caught. The last few months had been a whirlwind of small victories, community connections, and steady progress, but this was different. This was something official, serious, and potentially game-changing. He clicked open the message. The email was from a senior engineer at Neuralink, someone named Rachel, who introduced herself warmly but with a clear sense of urgency. Neuralink had been following his work closely, not just the circuit designs or the video tutorials, but the community he had built. They saw in Frank something rare, not just technical skill, but empathy, leadership, and the ability to bridge generations. Rachel's message outlined a proposal. Neuralink wanted to test one of their newest prototypes with real-world users, and they believed Frank's community could provide invaluable feedback. They were seeking volunteers, especially from older adults who might benefit from assistive technologies but often felt left out of such developments. Frank reread the lines again, disbelief swirling with excitement. Could this really be happening? Neuralink wanted him and his network involved in something at the frontier of brain-computer interfaces. But he also felt the old pang of doubt. Was he qualified? Would his community want to be part of something so high-tech and, frankly, scary? Was this all too big? The email ended with an invitation to a private virtual meeting to discuss the details. Frank closed his laptop, heart pounding. He looked over at Lucy, who wagged her tail gently, sensing his unrest. He stroked her head and whispered, "Well, girl, looks like we've got a decision to make." The night was restless, filled with racing thoughts and imagined scenarios. The next morning, Emily stopped by with Tommy. She noticed the flicker of uncertainty on Frank's face as he told her about the message. "Dad," she said softly, "this could be huge. But it's also okay if you say no. We just want you to be happy." Frank nodded, appreciating her support. But deep inside, a fire was kindling. Elon Musk's words echoed again, "If something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it." That afternoon, Frank logged into the meeting. Faces appeared on the screen: Neuralink engineers, project managers, even a neuroscientist. Rachel led the session, explaining the prototype, a non-invasive device designed to translate subtle brain signals into commands for computers and external devices. It was lighter, safer, and more accessible than previous models. They wanted to test the device with older adults to improve its design and usability. Frank listened, absorbing every word. Then came the part that made his stomach twist. Neuralink wanted him to recruit volunteers from his community to participate in the study. To be honest, he wasn't sure how to convince people who often feared new technology, especially brain tech, to trust such a bold idea. But as questions flowed, Frank found himself speaking with honesty. "Many of the folks I know have felt invisible, scared to try. But they're also curious. I think if we approach this with respect and clear information, we can help them see the benefits." The scientists nodded, impressed. The meeting ended with a promise to send devices and training materials, and a plan to stay connected throughout the process. Frank sat back, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Over the following days, he reached out to his closest contacts from the Senior Tech Saturdays and local groups. Some were hesitant. "I don't want wires in my head," one man said bluntly. Others were intrigued. A retired nurse said, "If this could help me keep my independence, I want to know more." Slowly, a small group formed, a diverse mix of older adults, each with their own fears and hopes. Frank organized a first introduction session, explaining the technology with transparency and patience. He showed videos, answered questions, and even demonstrated simple brainwave sensors to demystify the science. To his surprise, many were eager to participate. They weren't looking for miracles but for the chance to be involved in something meaningful. In the weeks that followed, Frank coordinated device shipments and training webinars. He became a hub of information and support. His kitchen table filled with devices, cables, manuals, and feedback notes. Some days were frustrating. Devices malfunctioned. Instructions confused participants. Fear lingered beneath the surface. But progress came too. One participant, Mary, a 74-year-old former librarian, reported how the device helped her control her tablet without lifting her fingers, allowing her to reconnect with distant family. Another, George, a Vietnam veteran, used it to adjust his wheelchair settings without assistance. These stories filtered back to Frank and renewed his sense of purpose. One afternoon, as he helped a participant troubleshoot a device, he caught sight of his own reflection in the window. He saw not just an aging man struggling with technology but a connector, a bridge between worlds. The LED on his thought switch blinked steadily on the bench behind him, a quiet reminder that no matter how old you are, you can still build, still create, still lead. News of the pilot program began spreading beyond Frank's immediate community. Neuralink invited him to share his experiences at a virtual conference focused on aging and technology. Nervous but determined, Frank prepared a presentation that mixed technical insights with personal stories. When the day arrived, he spoke not as an expert scientist but as a man who had found new purpose through connection and courage. "Age is not a barrier," he said. "It's a perspective. We bring wisdom, resilience, and hope. And when given the chance, we can embrace change and help shape the future. His words resonated. The chat overflowed with gratitude and support. Afterward, a message popped up from Rachel: "Thank you for sharing your story so honestly. You're making a real difference." Frank smiled, the glow of the screen warming his face. Back home, Lucy curled beside him as he reviewed the latest feedback forms. The project was far from over. Challenges remained. Some participants struggled with the technology. Some days Frank questioned if he was out of his depth. But he no longer felt alone. His community was growing stronger, braver, and more connected than ever. He understood now that transformation wasn't a single moment but a journey with many small steps. Elon Musk had sparked the flame, but it was the collective courage of everyday people just like him, that kept it burning bright. The blinking LED on his bench pulsed steadily, a silent heartbeat of hope and possibility. Frank whispered to himself, "We're just getting started." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The unexpected breakthrough. Frank sat in the quiet of his workshop, the familiar hum of his soldering iron and the steady blink of the thought switch circuit his only company. The past weeks had been a whirlwind, coordinating with Neuralink, supporting the pilot participants, and trying to keep up with the growing demands of his community projects. Yet, despite the late nights and mounting challenges, he felt a spark of hope that hadn't visited him in years. That hope was tested the moment his phone buzzed with an email from Rachel at Neuralink. The subject line was simple but electrifying: "Preliminary results are in." He opened the message with trembling hands. The report showed that the new interface devices, even in early trials, were producing significant improvements in user control and engagement, especially among older adults who had previously struggled with other assistive technologies. One participant had learned to navigate a tablet with just a thought, something she'd given up on after years of frustration. Another had gained enough control to adjust their electric wheelchair settings independently for the first time in years. The data was promising, but what struck Frank most was the personal stories attached. These were not just statistics, they were victories over fear, isolation, and doubt. He read a note from Mary, the retired librarian, describing how the device allowed her to reconnect with her grandchildren across the country through video calls. He smiled, feeling the warmth of her words as if she sat beside him. But the breakthrough wasn't just in the technology. It was in the human spirit. Frank realized the profound impact of giving people agency again, of showing them they still mattered in a rapidly changing world. With renewed energy, Frank called a meeting with his volunteer group, eager to share the news. As they gathered virtually, he felt the familiar mix of nerves and excitement. "We're making progress," he said, voice steady. "Your feedback and courage are helping shape something truly new, something that can change lives." The room filled with smiles and nods, a collective pride shining through the screens. But the breakthrough also brought new challenges. Neuralink wanted to accelerate the program, expand trials, and gather more data. Frank found himself pulled in multiple directions: community leader, technical advisor, and now reluctant spokesperson. The pressure weighed heavily, reminding him of the moments he'd once doubted his own worth. Yet, he remembered the words that had kept him moving. "If something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it." He focused on what mattered: helping people, building community, and staying true to the journey that had begun with a blinking LED in a small Ohio kitchen. One evening, as he reviewed notes from the day, his phone buzzed with a video call from Emily and Tommy. Tommy held up a small device he'd been working on, inspired by his grandfather's projects. "Look, Grandpa," he said proudly. "I wired it myself." Frank's heart swelled. The legacy was growing, one small spark at a time. Days later, Frank prepared to speak at a national conference on aging and technology. Standing before a virtual audience of experts, innovators, and advocates, He shared not just the technical progress but the story of transformation, the doubts, the setbacks, the community, and the unexpected breakthroughs. His voice carried the weight of experience and the lightness of renewed purpose. "We are not defined by our age," he said. "We are defined by our willingness to embrace change, to learn, and to connect. This journey has shown me that innovation is not just for the young. It is for anyone with the courage to begin again." The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people across the country, many older adults inspired to take their first steps into technology. Frank realized his mission had expanded beyond his workshop and community. It was now a movement. Yet amid the acclaim, Frank remained grounded. He returned to his garage each day, hands steadying on soldering irons, eyes focused on blinking circuits, heart open to every new challenge and story. The unexpected breakthrough had become a beacon, not just for technology, but for hope itself. And as the thought switch blinked softly on his bench, Frank knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The new challenge. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Frank sat quietly at his workbench, the familiar scent of solder and plastic surrounding him like an old friend. The past few months had been a whirlwind: community workshops, Neuralink collaborations, virtual conferences, but today felt different. A sense of calm, laced with the anticipation of what lay ahead. He glanced over at the thought switch circuit blinking steadily, its soft pulse a comforting rhythm in the stillness. Yet beneath that calm, a new challenge was stirring, one he hadn't expected but felt compelled to face. As he reviewed the latest feedback from pilot participants, a recurring theme emerged. While the device was helping many regain control and connection, some users faced frustration with the interface's learning curve. One participant, a retired engineer named Harold, had confided in Frank that he felt overwhelmed trying to master the controls, despite his technical background. Another, a woman named Claire, shared that occasional glitches left her feeling discouraged and hesitant to keep trying. Frank knew this was more than a technical hurdle, it was a barrier to the very empowerment they were striving to build. If the device was to truly make a difference, it needed to be accessible, intuitive, and forgiving. He sighed, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The old voice of doubt crept in, the one whispering that maybe this was beyond his reach, that he was too old to tackle something so complex. But then he thought of Elon Musk's words about fearlessness and rebellion against limitations, and he pushed the doubts aside. Frank decided the next step was clear: he needed to rally his community not just to use the technology, but to help improve it. Together, they could identify pain points, brainstorm solutions, and create a user experience that felt welcoming, not frustrating. He drafted an email inviting participants to a virtual innovation lab, a collaborative space where ideas could flow freely. To his surprise and delight, dozens responded immediately. The first innovation lab meeting was a mix of excitement, curiosity, and honest vulnerability. Participants shared their experiences, frustrations, and hopes. Some suggested simplifying instructions, others recommended more hands-on tutorials. Several proposed ideas for physical modifications to make the device easier to wear or adjust. Frank listened intently, jotting notes and encouraging open dialogue. It became clear that this was more than a focus group, it was a community co-creating its future. Over the next weeks, Frank worked closely with Neuralink engineers, relaying feedback and testing prototypes. He also organized peer-to-peer support sessions where participants could share tips and celebrate small wins. Slowly, the device evolved, not just in its design but in the way it was supported and taught. Meanwhile, Frank found himself growing in unexpected ways. He had always seen himself as a teacher, a guide for those navigating new territory, but now he was learning from his community too, their resilience, creativity, and generosity inspiring him daily. One afternoon, Lucy's bark interrupted a call from Rachel at Neuralink. Rachel shared exciting news: the company was impressed by the grassroots innovation and wanted to feature Frank and his community in a new campaign celebrating intergenerational collaboration and empowerment. Frank hesitated. He wasn't comfortable in the spotlight. But he also recognized the opportunity to amplify their message, that age was not a barrier to change, and that real innovation came from diverse voices working together. The campaign launch was a modest but heartfelt video showcasing participants using the device, sharing their stories, and highlighting the collaborative improvements made possible by their feedback. Viewers across social media praised the authenticity and warmth of the message. Frank received messages from older adults inspired to explore technology and younger people eager to learn from their elders. One email stood out. A college student studying biomedical engineering wrote, "Your community shows that innovation isn't just labs and labs coats, it's lived experience, courage, and connection." That night, Frank sat on his porch with Lucy nestled at his feet, the sky painted with stars. He reflected on the journey from that first blinking LED to this moment of unexpected breakthrough and shared triumph. He thought of the people who had once doubted him, those moments when he felt invisible or irrelevant. And he realized something profound: the true power of change wasn't just in new inventions or technology, it was in the willingness to embrace vulnerability, to reach out, and to believe that no matter our age, we have something vital to contribute. Frank whispered into the night, "We're not done yet. This is just the next chapter." The blinking thought switch on his bench pulsed gently, a steady heartbeat of hope and possibility. Crossing the divide, Frank woke early, the morning sun casting soft gold across his kitchen table where a fresh cup of coffee steamed beside his laptop. The world outside was already stirring, but his mind was restless, buzzing with the latest news from Neuralink. They had invited him to visit their headquarters, not just for another virtual meeting, but to come in person and witness the next stage of the brain-computer interface development firsthand. The invitation felt like a summons, a call to step beyond his familiar workshop and into the epicenter of innovation. Yet the excitement was tangled with nerves. Would he fit in among the young scientists and engineers? Would his decades of hands-on experience and community work be respected in that high-tech environment? The familiar voice of Elon Musk's mindset echoed in his thoughts: "You want to be involved in something meaningful, go there, be fearless." Frank dressed carefully, packed his notes and prototypes, and set out for the trip that would stretch far beyond the miles to Silicon Valley. The journey itself felt like a bridge between two worlds, small-town Ohio and the bustling nerve center of cutting-edge tech. Upon arrival, Frank was greeted warmly by Rachel and several engineers who had worked with him virtually. The sleek, futuristic campus buzzed with energy, screens displaying neural data, 3D models of brain implants, and teams collaborating in open spaces filled with whiteboards and digital sketches. Frank felt a thrill, but also a quiet humility. He was a man who had built circuits in his garage, not an engineer in a lab coat. Yet as the day unfolded, he realized that his perspective was exactly what the team needed. The lead neuroscientist explained the progress and challenges of the new prototype, a device designed to be minimally invasive, with improved signal fidelity and real-time adaptability. Frank listened closely, offering insights from his community's feedback. If the interface could better adapt to users' cognitive rhythms and energy levels, he suggested, it might ease frustration and increase engagement. The scientists nodded, intrigued by his practical experience. They took Frank on a tour of the testing facilities, where volunteers wore the devices while performing everyday tasks, from typing and painting to playing music. Watching the interactions, Frank saw firsthand the transformative power of technology paired with human spirit. But the most profound moment came later, in a small conference room where Frank met a group of older volunteers from the Neuralink trials. One woman, Marlene, shared her story with a quiet strength. She had lived with Parkinson's disease for over a decade and described how the device had helped her regain control over certain movements, restoring a piece of her independence she feared lost forever. Tears welled in Frank's eyes as Marlene reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for believing in us," she said softly. That evening, Frank found himself reflecting deeply on the divide between worlds, the young and the old, the tech elite and everyday users, the future and the past. He understood that bridging this divide required more than innovation, it demanded empathy, communication, and respect. The next day, inspired by his experiences, Frank proposed a new initiative to Neuralink, a mentorship program pairing young engineers with older volunteers to foster mutual learning and co-creation. The idea was met with enthusiasm. Frank envisioned workshops where stories and skills flowed in both directions, breaking stereotypes and building community across generations. Returning home, Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose. The trip had stretched him beyond comfort, but also expanded his horizon. He realized that transformation wasn't just personal, it was collective. Elon Musk's radical thinking had sparked a journey, but the real power lay in connections between people. Back in his workshop, the thought switch blinked steadily as Frank began drafting plans for the mentorship program. He reached out to his local library and community center to partner on hosting events. Slowly, momentum built. At the first meeting, young engineers arrived with laptops and notebooks, eager but uncertain. Older participants brought wisdom and patience. Conversations flowed, about technology, life, challenges, dreams. Together, they dismantled fears and built bridges. One young engineer named Alex shared how he'd never spoken much with his grandparents but now found himself fascinated by their stories and insights. Meanwhile, Marlene taught Alex how to paint, her hands steady despite tremors. Frank watched the scene unfold with a warm smile, knowing this was more than just technology, it was healing and hope. News of the program spread through social media and local press, inspiring similar efforts in other cities. Frank became a reluctant but passionate ambassador for a new kind of innovation, one rooted in humanity and inclusion. Yet even as successes multiplied, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced change easily. Some older adults remained skeptical, clinging to fears and past disappointments. Some young people struggled to see the value in older voices. Frank worked tirelessly to listen, mediate, and encourage. He learned to embrace imperfection and patience, understanding that transformation took time. One evening, as he sat in his workshop, Lucy curled at his feet. Frank whispered, "This is the real breakthrough, the one that changes hearts and minds." The blinking thought switch pulsed softly, a reminder that every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. And in that quiet moment, Frank knew that crossing the divide was the most important journey of all. Frank sat in his favorite armchair, the worn leather creaking beneath him as he stared out the window at the late summer afternoon. The gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze was the only sound in the quiet house, save for Lucy's soft breathing at his feet. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind since his return from Silicon Valley, between the mentorship program launch, community workshops, and the steady stream of emails and calls. Frank felt a tiredness deeper than physical exhaustion. But within that fatigue was a simmering excitement. The possibilities ahead felt boundless. He took a sip of coffee, his mind wandering to Elon Musk's words from a recent interview, "The future belongs to those who dare to dream bigger, no matter their age or circumstance." That sentiment echoed inside Frank like a beacon. His journey had begun with a small blinking LED in his garage, a spark that grew into a movement. Now, he dreamed of expanding the reach beyond his hometown, beyond the pilot programs and trials. What if this technology and spirit could transform aging everywhere? Inspired, Frank opened his laptop and began sketching ideas for a nonprofit organization, a hub for older adults to learn, innovate, and share their own stories of transformation. He envisioned a space where technology met heart, where barriers of age and fear were dismantled by curiosity and community. He called it the New Dawn Initiative. The name felt fitting, a fresh start for those who had long felt forgotten or left behind. Over the next few days, Frank reached out to friends, volunteers, and even some of the engineers at Neuralink. To his surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Many shared stories of their own struggles with aging and technology, their hopes for a more inclusive future. With Rachel's help, Frank secured initial funding from a small grant focused on aging innovation. The work of launching the New Dawn Initiative began in earnest, finding a physical space, recruiting volunteers, designing curricula, and most importantly, listening to what older adults wanted and needed. One afternoon, during a focus group at the local library, a woman named Evelyn shared her story. She was a retired schoolteacher who had always loved art but gave up painting after her husband's death. "I feel invisible now," she said quietly. "Like my best years are behind me." Frank felt a familiar ache in his chest. "Evelyn," he said gently, "what if this new chapter could be your brightest yet?" Encouraged by the group, Evelyn agreed to lead a weekly art workshop, blending creativity with technology, using digital tablets paired with the thought switch to paint again. Word spread quickly. The New Dawn initiative became a sanctuary for rekindling passions, learning new skills, and forging friendships. Frank watched as people who once doubted their ability to change blossomed in a supportive environment. Yet, as the initiative grew, so did its challenges. Securing sustainable funding, managing volunteers, and balancing his own health tested Frank's resolve. Some days, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily. Doubts crept in. Could one man make a difference on such a scale? Would the spark he ignited continue to burn long after he was gone? But each time, he found strength in the stories around him, in Evelyn's first digital painting, in Lucy's joyful barks greeting newcomers, in the laughter echoing through the community center. One evening, as Frank prepared notes for an upcoming conference, he received a call from his son, Tommy. They hadn't spoken much in recent months, the distance between them growing with time and unspoken hurts. Tommy's voice was tentative but sincere. "Dad, I've been following what you're doing. I'm proud of you. Maybe we can talk more." Frank's heart lifted. The gap he feared might never close was beginning to narrow. The next morning, Frank sat at his desk, gazing at the blinking thought switch, a symbol of persistence, hope, and transformation. He whispered, "This is just the beginning. Together, we're building a new vision for aging, a future where no one is left behind." And with that, he felt a peace that only comes from purpose fulfilled and a journey embraced. The ripple effect. Frank's New Dawn initiative had grown from a local project into a beacon that began to draw attention from nearby towns and even national organizations focused on aging and technology. Every morning, he awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, energized by the stories of transformation unfolding around him. The community center buzzed with activity, older adults learning to use tablets, coding classes adapted for beginners, art workshops blending traditional creativity with digital tools. Frank moved through the rooms, greeting faces both familiar and new, feeling the steady pulse of hope. Yet as the initiative expanded, so did the challenges. Securing funding became a constant task, juggling grants, donations, and sponsorships to keep programs running. Frank faced resistance too. Some local officials questioned the value of investing in what they called technology for the elderly. But Frank held firm, armed with the stories of people like Evelyn, whose digital paintings now graced local galleries, and Harold, who had regained confidence to reconnect with his estranged daughter thanks to the communication tools they developed together. The ripple effect was undeniable. One morning, Frank received a call from a major public television station interested in producing a documentary about the initiative. The idea of cameras in his quiet town felt overwhelming, yet he recognized the opportunity to inspire others across the country. The documentary crew arrived, capturing candid moments, the tentative first steps of a man learning to navigate a touchscreen, the laughter of a group discovering virtual reality art, the pride of volunteers mentoring younger generations. Through the lens, Frank's vision came alive, a vibrant, intergenerational community breaking down barriers of age and fear. As filming progressed, Frank reflected on the profound shift within himself. He had started this journey burdened by regrets and doubts, feeling invisible and too old to change. Now, he was a leader, a bridge between generations, a catalyst for hope. He realized that the true breakthrough wasn't just the technology, but the courage to embrace vulnerability and connection. One afternoon, during a community event, a young woman approached Frank. "Mr. Donovan, I'm a student studying gerontology," she said. "Your work is changing how we think about aging. It's inspiring." Frank smiled, the familiar warmth spreading in his chest. Thank you. It's a journey we're all on together. The ripple effect extended beyond his community too. Inspired by Frank's initiative, other towns launched similar programs, tailoring the model to their own needs. Online forums connected participants across states, sharing tips, stories, and encouragement. Frank found himself part of a growing network of changemakers, united by a vision that aging could be a time of growth, creativity, and connection. Yet amid the successes, Frank remained humble. He knew the journey was ongoing. Challenges persisted, health concerns, skepticism, and the ever-present fear of being left behind. But each challenge was met with resilience, each setback an opportunity to learn and adapt. One evening, as Frank sat on his porch with Lucy, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he whispered, "We're making waves, one life at a time." The blinking thought switch on his workbench pulsed softly in the twilight, a steady heartbeat of hope and possibility. And in that quiet moment, Frank knew the ripple effect would continue to grow, carried by every person brave enough to take that first step. Facing the shadows, Frank sat alone in his workshop late into the night, the dim glow of his desk lamp illuminating scattered papers, circuit boards, and the ever-present thought switch blinking quietly like a heartbeat. The day's successes weighed heavily against an unexpected tide of doubt and exhaustion. Despite the growing momentum of the New Dawn initiative, Frank felt the shadows creeping back, the nagging fears of failure, irrelevance, and the relentless march of time. His body ached more than usual, a reminder that the years were catching up with him. The blistering energy that had once fueled his every move now flickered uncertainly. He recalled a recent conversation with his doctor, who had gently advised slowing down, cautioning him about stress and health risks. "You're doing too much," the doctor had said. But Frank felt torn. To slow down now felt like surrender. Instead, he wrestled with the question haunting every older adult trying to rewrite their story: is it too late for me? Elon Musk's voice echoed faintly in his mind, his fearless drive, his refusal to accept limitations. Yet even Elon was human, vulnerable to exhaustion and doubt. Frank realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it. The next morning, Frank forced himself outside, walking Lucy down familiar streets bathed in early sunlight. The fresh air cleared some fog, but the inner turmoil lingered. That day, a letter arrived from the city council. Funding for the New Dawn initiative was at risk due to budget cuts. The blow felt personal, a stark reminder that progress was fragile. Frank grappled with discouragement but resolved to fight. He called a meeting with volunteers and community leaders, sharing the news honestly and asking for ideas. To his surprise, the room filled with determination rather than despair. Plans emerged: fundraising events, grant applications, outreach to local businesses. The community's support was a lifeline. Around the same time, a harsh critique surfaced on social media from a tech blogger who questioned the effectiveness of Neuralink's devices, calling them overhyped and dismissing the efforts of grassroots programs like Frank's as naive. The comments stung deeply. Frank felt the familiar sting of invisibility and doubt creeping back. But instead of retreating, he used the criticism as fuel. He reached out to the blogger, inviting them to visit the initiative and see the real impact firsthand. To his surprise, the blogger accepted. The visit was tense at first, but as the blogger met participants like Marlene and Evelyn, heard their stories, and witnessed the joy and empowerment firsthand, the skepticism softened. A follow-up article acknowledged the transformative power of community-driven innovation and the vital role of older adults as pioneers of change. The experience reinforced a vital lesson, that fighting shadows required not just resilience but openness and humility. Frank also faced personal shadows, fractured relationships, especially with Tommy. The tentative calls and messages sometimes faltered under old wounds and misunderstandings. Frank sought counseling, eager to heal and rebuild. Through patience and honest conversations, small bridges were mended. One evening, Tommy surprised him by showing up at the community center's open house. They stood awkwardly for a moment before embracing, a powerful moment of renewal. As the weeks passed, Frank learned to balance ambition with self-care, to accept help and set boundaries. He realized that transformation wasn't a sprint but a marathon requiring endurance and grace. Sitting in his workshop one quiet night, he gazed at the blinking thought switch and whispered, "Even in darkness, there is light. We just have to keep looking for it." And with that, Frank felt the shadows retreat, replaced by a steady flame of hope and determination. The breakthrough moment. Frank woke to the soft hum of morning, sunlight filtering through the curtains and casting a warm glow across his workshop. The air carried the faint scent of fresh coffee and aged wood, a comforting blend of the familiar and the new. Today felt different, charged with a quiet energy that stirred something deep within him. Over the past months, the journey with the New Dawn initiative had been a roller coaster of hope, struggle, setbacks, and small victories. Frank had faced doubts, physical challenges, and moments of loneliness, yet he had persevered, fueled by the stories of those who found new purpose and connection through their collective efforts. As he sat at his workbench, the blinking thought switch seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, a beacon guiding him forward. Then came the call from Neuralink's lead scientist, Dr. Simmons, with news that sent a surge of excitement through him. They had developed a new software update for the brain-computer interface, one that promised greater responsiveness, reduced learning curves, and adaptive feedback tailored to each user's unique neural patterns. This breakthrough could transform the way older adults engaged with the technology, making it more intuitive and accessible. Frank felt a surge of hope. He coordinated with Rachel and the Neuralink team to organize a pilot trial with members of the New Dawn initiative. The anticipation was palpable as volunteers prepared to test the enhanced device. Evelyn, with her art workshop blossoming, was among the first to try it. As she strapped on the updated interface, her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of possibility. The room held its breath as she began to interact with the digital canvas. Colors flowed effortlessly under her touch, the device responding smoothly to her intentions. A smile broke across her face, a radiant expression of rediscovered freedom and joy. Others followed, each experiencing breakthroughs in communication, mobility, or creativity. Harold reconnected with his daughter through seamless video chats facilitated by the new interface. Marlene reported improved control over her movements, her Parkinson's symptoms lessened in moments when the device was active. Frank watched, emotion swelling. This was the moment they had worked toward, the fusion of technology and human spirit in perfect harmony. The breakthrough rippled beyond the trial. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a milestone in aging and technology. Invitations arrived for Frank to speak at conferences and panels, sharing the journey from a garage tinkerer to a community leader at the forefront of innovation. Yet, amid the acclaim, Frank remained grounded. He knew that this was not an endpoint but a stepping stone, a reminder that progress was a continuous path requiring persistence and collaboration. One evening, after a long day of presentations and meetings, Frank sat quietly with Lucy on his porch. The stars sparkled overhead, the night whispering promises of tomorrow. He reflected on the transformation, not just in technology, but in himself and his community. From fear to courage, from isolation to connection, from doubt to breakthrough. Elon Musk's fearless mindset had ignited the spark, but it was the collective heart and hands of so many that fanned it into a blaze. Frank whispered into the night, "We've crossed a threshold, but the journey is far from over. Together, we will keep pushing boundaries, because the future belongs to those who dare." The thought switch blinked steadily inside, a pulse of light in the dark, a symbol of infinite possibility. The turning point. Frank's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The New Dawn initiative had blossomed from a hopeful idea into a thriving community movement, empowering countless older adults to reclaim their voices, passions, and dreams. Yet, as with any journey worth taking, the path was never straight or easy. This chapter of Frank's story opened with a moment of reckoning, when hope met reality in a collision that demanded strength, resilience, and a renewed vision. One crisp autumn morning, Frank arrived at the community center to find a crowd gathered outside, buzzing with excitement. The local newspaper had published an in-depth feature on the New Dawn initiative, highlighting its impact and innovation. The article described Frank as a visionary, a symbol of what it meant to defy expectations about aging. For a fleeting moment, Frank felt the rush of pride and validation. But beneath that, an undercurrent of pressure and responsibility settled in his chest. Could he live up to this new role? Could he sustain the momentum? That afternoon, during a meeting with his team, a heated discussion erupted. Some volunteers wanted to expand rapidly, taking the program statewide. Others urged caution, emphasizing the need to consolidate and deepen existing work. The debate grew tense, reflecting the inevitable growing pains of any grassroots movement. Frank listened carefully, weighing the perspectives with care. He realized that leadership wasn't about having all the answers but about guiding others toward shared purpose. Drawing on the lessons from Elon Musk's boldness and adaptability, Frank proposed a phased plan, one that balanced ambition with sustainability, innovation with inclusion. The group reached a consensus, renewed by a common commitment. But the turning point came later that evening, when Frank received a call from his son, Tommy. Their relationship had been fragile, marked by years of distance and misunderstanding. Yet Tommy's voice was steady, hopeful. "Dad, I want to be part of this," he said simply. "I want to help." The invitation filled Frank with both joy and apprehension. Could they truly heal old wounds? Could they build something new together? Over the following weeks, father and son began working side by side, merging their strengths and mending their bond through shared purpose. Tommy brought fresh ideas and energy, while Frank offered wisdom and experience. Their partnership became a living testament to the power of transformation and connection. Meanwhile, the initiative's influence continued to spread. Local officials who once doubted now sought partnerships, recognizing the program's value in addressing aging and isolation. Media stories featured participants' breakthroughs, showcasing the human side of technological innovation. Frank's health, while never perfect, stabilized as he learned to balance activity with rest, accepting support without guilt. In quiet moments, he reflected on the journey, from the flickering thought switch in his garage to the vibrant community he helped build. He understood now that true change required embracing uncertainty, confronting fears, and choosing hope every day. Elon Musk's example had sparked the journey, but it was Frank's own courage, and that of countless others, that carried it forward. On a chilly evening, as leaves danced in the wind outside his window, Frank sat with Lucy at his feet and whispered, "This is the turning point, not an end, but a new beginning." The blinking thought switch pulsed softly nearby, a steady heartbeat in the unfolding story of life, change, and limitless possibility. Embracing the future, the New Dawn initiative had become more than just a local program, it was a movement. Frank often marveled at how a simple idea sparked by a blinking light in his garage had grown into a thriving network of older adults discovering new purpose and power in the digital age. Yet the most profound changes were not just in technology or community but within Frank himself. He had evolved from a man shadowed by regret and doubt into a beacon of hope and action, proving that age was not a barrier but a doorway. As autumn deepened, Frank found himself standing at a crossroads once again. Invitations arrived from universities, tech companies, and government agencies eager to learn from the New Dawn initiative's model. They wanted him to speak, consult, and collaborate on projects that bridged aging and innovation nationwide. The opportunities were exhilarating, yet overwhelming. He realized he could no longer carry the weight alone. It was time to build a team, a legacy that would outlast him. With Tommy now a committed partner, Frank began assembling a diverse group of leaders, caregivers, engineers, artists, activists, all passionate about transforming the narrative of aging. Together, they crafted a strategic vision, to expand the initiative's reach while preserving its heart, community, dignity, and empowerment. One crisp morning, Frank led a virtual meeting with partners across the country. Faces lit up screens from New York to San Francisco, all united by a shared dream. The conversation was electric with ideas, from creating adaptive virtual reality experiences for seniors to launching intergenerational mentorship programs connecting retirees with youth in technology fields. Frank felt a swell of pride. This was the future, collaborative, creative, inclusive. Yet, amid the excitement, he remained grounded. He remembered the dark days when he felt invisible, forgotten, too old to change. Those memories fueled his commitment to ensure no one felt left behind. At home, Frank continued to nurture his own growth. He picked up painting again, blending traditional brushstrokes with digital techniques enabled by the thought switch. The creative process became a meditation, a joyful expression of his journey. Lucy's playful presence brought laughter and warmth, grounding him in the present moment. One evening, as Frank walked through the community center's gallery showcasing participants' artwork, he paused before Evelyn's latest piece, a vibrant explosion of color and life. Evelyn approached, her eyes shining. "I never thought I'd paint again," she said softly. "Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late." Frank smiled, feeling the profound truth of her words. The impact of their work rippled far beyond technology. It touched hearts and restored dreams. In quieter moments, Frank often reflected on Elon Musk's role as a catalyst, not a savior but an inspiration to challenge limits and envision bold futures. Frank had taken that spark and made it his own, proving that transformation was possible at any stage of life. He had rewritten his story from fear to courage, isolation to connection, resignation to purpose. As winter approached, Frank felt a deep sense of peace. The journey was ongoing, with new challenges and adventures ahead, but he faced them with an open heart and unwavering resolve. Sitting by the fire one evening, Lucy nestled at his feet. Frank whispered into the flickering flames, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for the courage to begin." The blinking thought switch pulsed softly nearby, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the limitless potential of the human spirit. The future was bright, and Frank was ready to embrace it. The power of connection. The quiet hum of the community center in the early morning held a special kind of promise. Frank arrived before anyone else, the soft light spilling through large windows casting long shadows across familiar faces etched on walls and canvases. It was a place transformed, not just by technology, but by the bonds forged through shared struggle and triumph. Over the years, Frank had witnessed something extraordinary: people who once felt invisible now standing tall, their voices heard, their passions reignited. The thought switch, once a blinking novelty on his workbench, had become a symbol of this transformation, a heartbeat connecting minds and hearts. This chapter in Frank's journey was about embracing the true power of connection, the intangible threads linking individuals to community, purpose, and hope. One afternoon, as volunteers prepared for a new workshop focused on intergenerational storytelling, Frank watched Lucy playfully chase her tail in the corner. He felt a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought him here, a path winding through doubt, pain, innovation, and love. The stories told in the workshop were more than words, they were bridges spanning time, healing old wounds and building new understanding. Frank's own story became part of this tapestry, a testament to resilience and possibility. As the workshop unfolded, young adults and seniors exchanged memories and dreams, laughter mingling with tears. Frank observed a young woman named Maya, who had struggled to find meaning after her father's death. Through sharing and listening, she found a renewed sense of belonging. Frank realized that connection was the foundation upon which transformation was built, whether through technology, community, or empathy. In the weeks that followed, Frank's network expanded further. Partnerships formed with local schools, bringing students and seniors together in collaborative projects blending art, science, and storytelling. The initiative's reach stretched beyond town borders, inspiring a movement of connection and innovation across states. Frank's health remained a delicate balance, but the support of his community and family buoyed him. Tommy had become a steady presence, their relationship strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Frank sat quietly with Tommy on the porch. The stars glittered overhead, a vast canvas of possibility. Tommy turned to his father and said, "You've shown me what it means to keep going, to believe in change even when it feels impossible." Frank smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "We're all part of something bigger," he replied. "That's the real breakthrough." As winter's chill deepened, Frank prepared for a special event, a gala celebrating the impact of the New Dawn initiative. Invitations had been sent far and wide, and anticipation buzzed through the community. The night arrived with sparkling lights and heartfelt speeches, showcasing the stories of transformation that had unfolded. Frank took the stage, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He spoke not only of technology or progress, but of the enduring power of human connection, the spark that kindled hope and fueled change. "We are never alone," he said. "Together, we can break through any barrier, rewrite any story, and create a future filled with possibility." As applause washed over him, Frank looked out at the faces, young and old, familiar and new, and felt the full circle of his journey. From a man weighed down by doubt to a leader illuminating the path for others, Frank understood that the true breakthrough was not a device or a program, but the connections that bind us all. The thought switch blinked softly nearby, a quiet reminder that even the smallest spark can ignite a blaze. And in that light, Frank knew the future was bright with promise. The new legacy. Frank stood at the edge of the community center's garden, the crisp morning air carrying the scent of blooming flowers and fresh beginnings. Around him, faces of friends, neighbors, and collaborators gathered, a vibrant mosaic of ages, backgrounds, and stories. The New Dawn initiative had become a living testament to the power of courage, connection, and relentless hope. Today wasn't just a celebration, it was a passing of the torch, an invitation to every soul present to carry forward a legacy of transformation. As Frank looked out over the crowd, memories flooded his mind, the long nights tinkering in his garage, the painful doubts, the fractured relationships, the small victories that stitched together into something extraordinary. He thought of Elon Musk, the spark that had ignited his journey, not as a savior, but as a symbol of fearless reinvention. Frank cleared his throat, stepping to the podium. His voice, steady and warm, filled the garden. "I once believed that my story was nearly over, that I was too old, too worn, too invisible. But I was wrong. This journey has taught me that it's never too late to change, to grow, to matter. We all have a legacy, not one defined by years, but by the impact we choose to make." He paused, eyes sweeping the crowd, meeting gazes filled with hope and resolve. The New Dawn initiative started with a simple idea, a blinking light in my garage and a question: what if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? That question became a movement because of each of you. Because together, we refuse to accept limits. A hush fell over the gathering, the weight of shared experience binding everyone in a moment of profound connection. Frank continued, "Our legacy isn't just in technology or programs, it's in the lives rekindled, the dreams reclaimed, the barriers broken. It's in the courage to face fear and say, I am still here. I still matter." After his speech, the celebration flowed with laughter, music, and stories, each a thread in the tapestry of their shared journey. Frank watched as older adults danced with children, artists displayed new creations, and volunteers exchanged plans for the next chapter. In a quiet corner, Tommy approached, a proud smile on his face. "Dad, this is just the beginning. What you started is going to inspire generations." Frank nodded, gratitude swelling in his heart. "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." As the sun set, casting golden light across the garden, Frank retreated briefly to his workshop. The thought switch blinked steadily on his workbench, a symbol of hope, resilience, and endless possibility. He reached out, pressing the switch once more, feeling the pulse of that first spark. And with a smile, he whispered, "Here's to the new dawn." The story closed not with an end, but with an invitation, to every reader, every soul who ever felt forgotten or too old, that the next chapter is theirs to write, filled with courage, connection, and the unyielding belief that it's never too late to change. The future waits, bright and wide open. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?